You should have stayed quiet, Mr. Statham. You clearly don't understand the law. The courtroom chuckles. A petty fine, a smug judge, and a room full of eyes watching Jason Statham get humiliated over a parking ticket. But Jason doesn't. Flinch. He leans forward, voice low. I understand it better than you think. What they don't know is, Jason isn't just another face in a cheap suit. Behind that quiet stare is a man who's spent years buried in legal books, not for power, but for redemption. You can fine me, Your Honor, but you might want to. Read the statute first. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. Jason Statham didn't look like a man with a law degree. Most people in town just saw the sleeves rolled up, the calloused hands, the smudge of grease across his jaw that never quite washed off. He ran Statham's Auto and Marine, a weathered garage nestled between the salt-blown cliffs and the quieter end of Main Street. Folks came to him when engines sputtered, transmissions whined, or trailers bent under Oregon's coastal storms. What they didn't know was, Jason could have taken apart the state penal code just as easily. His life was quiet now, and he liked it that way. The days were steady. He'd wake before the sun, sweep the gravel lot, fix whatever showed up broken, and close up by 6 unless something needed saving. Then he'd disappear into the backroom, a low-ceilinged cave filled with engine parts, 2 space heaters, and rows of old legal textbooks stacked like bricks around a metal cot. They weren't for decoration. Jason read them. Every night. Same. Way other men read the news or sports stats. He didn't just understand the law, he carried it like muscle memory. There was a framed letter nailed above the cot. Bar exam results. He'd passed first try 12 years ago. Back when he wore clean shirts and believed in justice, like it was something you could hold in your hands. But life took a different road. One detour turned into another, and before long, Jason stopped chasing the courtrooms and started fixing what was in front of him. Most people never asked why he left the law. The few who did got a shrug and a half smile. Engine blocks are more honest, he'd say, but there was a truth he never said out loud. He didn't walk away from justice because he failed it. He walked away because once someone needed him to win, and he didn't. Still, even in his quiet life, the habits remained. He helped people sort out DMV fines, showed seniors how to read their lease agreements, once even drafted a small claims, petitioned for a waitress who got stiffed on overtime, never asked for thanks, never charged a dime. There was a strength in staying small, staying useful. On the weekends, he visited the farmer's market, not to buy much but to feel the rhythm of the town, see who was struggling, who looked lost. He'd nod to the mayor, toss a quarter to the street musician, hold the door open for anyone carrying a baby. These were the things that mattered now: kindness, routine, a life without heat or headlines. No one suspected the depth beneath the quiet, that the man who fixed their brakes could quote civil precedent from memory, that the same Jason Statham once stood at the steps of a courthouse in D.C., holding a portfolio full of change-the-world dreams. That's the thing about hiding in plain sight. Eventually, someone mistakes your silence for weakness, and when that happens, they find out exactly who you used to be. It started with a mistake, or at least, that's what Jason Statham thought. A bright orange slip of paper fluttered under the windshield wiper of his truck, a parking violation for a zone he never parked in. He stood there, reading it twice, slow and deliberate. Issued at 10:43 a.m. while he'd been elbow-deep in a boat engine across town. He could have ignored it, paid the $50 and moved on. But something about it felt wrong. Lazy, sloppy, like someone figured nobody would question it. So he didn't. Jason walked into the courthouse on a Tuesday morning, holding the slip like a piece of evidence. The line was short. A clerk looked up, disinterested, and waved him toward room 3B. You'll need to talk to the judge. He stepped into the courtroom wearing his usual work boots, flannel, oil-stained jeans, no suit, no briefcase, just the truth. Judge Harold Brentley barely looked up from his bench when Jason stood before him. A career man with a fondness for self-importance, Brentley had a reputation in the county, strict on respect, ruthless on fines, and always 2 steps too proud. He peered over his glasses, scanning Jason like he was furniture someone left on the curb. "You're here for the parking fine?" "Yes, sir. It's incorrect." Brentley arched a brow. "And you're a lawyer?" "No, but I've studied the statute. ORS 811-550, subsection 15. The sign marking the restricted zone wasn't in legal compliance with city code. The citation's invalid." A few chuckles broke out from the gallery. The bailiff smirked. Brentley's face turned red. "You don't quote law in my courtroom, Mr. Statham." "Jason Statham." Brentley leaned forward. "Well, Mr. Statham, I don't appreciate being corrected by a grease monkey who thinks he's got a law degree from Google." Jason didn't flinch. "You can fine me, sir, but that won't make the citation valid." Silence. Then the gavel slammed down. $5,000 for contempt, the courtroom gasped. Jason blinked once. Just once. "You may leave now, Mr. Statham, and next time you want to play lawyer, do it in your garage." He left without a word, but inside something ancient stirred. Not rage, not pride, something colder, cleaner, the sound of truth sharpening its edge. Back at the garage, he closed early, pulled the rolling door halfway down and locked it. Then he walked into the back room, pulled out his oldest box, and opened the books he hadn't touched in over a decade. The smell of yellowed paper and forgotten power filled the air. He didn't stop reading until dawn. Jason wasn't just looking for the statute that proved him right. He already knew it by heart. He was looking for patterns, a history. How many other people had been fined by Judge Brentley without cause? It didn't take long. Public records were like engines. Once you knew how to trace the lines, everything opened up. Hundreds of low-level fines, misused statutes, bench warrants issued. Without proper notice, there it was, in black and white, a pattern of predatory targeting against people who couldn't fight back. Then came a name, Maria Ellison, single mother of 2, fined repeatedly. Missed a court date after her summons was mailed to the wrong address. Judge Brentley issued a bench warrant. She was jailed for 48 hours. During that time, her kids were taken into state custody. One mistake, one broken system, a whole life shattered. Jason tracked her down through a community center directory. She worked nights at a bakery, slept in her car between shifts. She didn't want pity. She just wanted her children back. He sat across from her at a diner, notebook open. She didn't recognize him, just saw another face pretending to care, until he asked about the date of her hearing. Then the name of the clerk. Then the docket number. "You really know this stuff?" she asked. Jason didn't answer. He just nodded, then handed her a yellow envelope. "What's this?" "Motion to reopen your case. You'll need to sign it in front of a notary." Maria stared at the paper like it was a lottery ticket. But Jason was already gone, walking out into the gray morning with fire in his chest. The next day, he returned to the courthouse, not in silence this time, but with a motion of his own. Handwritten, perfectly cited, delivered straight to the clerk's desk. Brentley read it 3 hours later and paused for the first time in weeks, because this wasn't just a man contesting a fine anymore. It was the start of something bigger, something dangerous, something undeniable. Jason Statham had no robe, no title, and no letters after his name. But the moment Judge Brentley read that motion, the walls of his courtroom began to shake. The initial request to void the contempt fine was surgically written, citing precedent so rare they'd never even been mentioned in that district. Brentley, already bruised from being publicly corrected, denied it. Summarily, no hearing, no discussion, just a stamp that read, "Dismissed." Jason didn't flinch. He filed an appeal with the circuit court the next morning, then another for Maria's custody case. Then a third, this one demanding an audit of all Brentley's fines over the past 24 months. That one made the county office nervous. Brentley, furious and humiliated, launched a quiet war. Zoning inspectors showed up at Jason's garage unannounced. They flagged minor violations, paint peeling, a broken exit sign, a rusted fire extinguisher bracket, and slapped him with a $3,200 penalty. Jason paid it in cash without blinking and requested every form he needed to file a municipal countersuit. He filed it the same day. Word started to spread. Locals talked about the mechanic who stood up to the judge, the one who used Latin legal phrases while rebuilding transmissions. At first it was whispers. Then it became something else. They came in ones and twos. A waitress wrongfully evicted. A landscaper fined for an unlicensed tool trailer. An elderly veteran cited for a cracked sidewalk he didn't own. All of them had one thing in common. They'd been in Brentley's courtroom, and they all sat down at the folding table Jason had set up in the corner of his garage, just under a handwritten sign that read, "Need help? Sit down." Jason didn't make promises. He asked questions, took notes, drafted motions, with pencil and paper like it was 1974. Then he walked each person through their rights, one page at a time. Brentley retaliated harder. He had court staff label Jason as a serial filer, a trick used to flag frequent petitioners as nuisance litigants. It would have worked, except Jason anticipated it. He filed a preemptive motion, with the State Bar's Oversight Committee attaching a spreadsheet of Brentley's dismissals, proof of systemic obstruction. By now, the local news had caught wind. Cameras began showing up outside the courthouse. Brentley closed proceedings to the public. That move backfired. A retired judge named Elsie Drummond, someone Jason once admired, wrote an op-ed in the Oregon Sentinel calling the secrecy a stain on judicial transparency. And still, Jason never raised his voice. But inside, the pressure mounted. His garage was vandalized late one night. Red paint scrawled across the aluminum walls in dripping letters. "Stay in your lane." Tools were missing. A window shattered. Jason stared at it the next morning, jaw tight. For a moment, the quiet life he'd fought so hard to protect felt like it was slipping away. He could have packed up, left town, forgotten the system all over again. Instead, he cleaned the wall himself, then added a second sign under the table. "They want me to stop. That means we're close." One afternoon, a young man named Devin stopped by. 19, nervous, clutching a citation for resisting arrest, though all he'd done was ask why he was being searched. Jason looked over the papers and asked just one question. "Were you read your rights?" Devin shook his head. Jason took a deep breath, pulled a thick volume off the shelf, and opened it to a bookmarked page. "Then we start here." That night, Jason worked until 2 a.m. He found an error in Brentley's procedural order, a timestamp inconsistency that could unravel more than just Devin's case. It could call into question the judge's entire courtroom calendar. That was the crack. He circled it in red and smiled. The next morning, Jason returned to the courthouse and submitted a formal motion to the Oregon Judicial Fitness Commission, accusing Judge Brentley of misconduct under Section 1.2 of the state's ethical code. He had everything: paperwork, testimony, even security footage from a court lobby that showed Brentley signing off on hearings before they were even docketed. Brentley's hands were finally shaking, but he had one more card to play. He called for an emergency contempt hearing against Jason, accused him of unauthorized legal practice, disrupting court function, and filing under names that weren't his. It was a last-ditch attempt to muzzle him, to paint him as a rogue troublemaker. Jason accepted the summons without protest. No lawyers, no allies, just him and a folder of truth. He showed up early, wore clean boots, shaved, sat in the front row, silent as the room filled with faces, dozens of people he'd helped. Maria was there. Devon, the veteran, even Elsie Drummond. They weren't there for drama. They were there because they'd seen what justice could look like, and they weren't about to let it get buried. Jason stared forward, eyes locked on the bench, hands folded over the folder in his lap. The door opened. Brentley walked in, and Jason knew this wasn't about his fine anymore. It was about the soul of the courthouse, and it was time to bring the truth to the stand. They tried to bury him under paper, titles, and fear. But when Jason Statham stood up in that courtroom, everything stopped. The emergency hearing had been called to strip him of credibility, to finally paint him as a fraud. The charge was unauthorized legal practice, and Brentley sat higher than ever on the bench, gavel polished, robe crisp, face carved in smug anticipation. This was meant to be a public shaming, the final chapter in a quiet rebellion. But Jason didn't come to defend himself. He came to put the system on trial. The courtroom was packed, not with lawyers or reporters, but with regular people, neighbors, teachers, clerks, a woman who once watched Jason fix her brakes for free. Every seat was filled. Some stood in the aisles, all of them silent. Jason walked to the center, holding nothing but a manila folder and a heart full of names. "Mr. Statham," Brentley began, "you are not a licensed attorney in the state of Oregon. You've been filing motions, giving legal advice, and misrepresenting yourself before this court." Jason looked up, voice steady. "I've never claimed to be an attorney. I've written documents, yes. I've helped people understand the law, yes. But everything I submitted was under their own names, signed by their own hands. I didn't speak for them. I gave them back the voice this courtroom took." Brentley smirked, trying to maintain control. "This isn't about philosophy, Mr. Statham. It's about the law." Jason opened the folder. "Then let's talk about it." He held up a stack of documents, color-coded, bound in string. The room watched as he set them on the table one by one. "These are records from your courtroom. Judge Brentley, over 320 cases in the past 2 years where defendants were fined over the statutory maximum." A murmur rolled through the room. Jason didn't stop. "Here's a sworn statement from a former court clerk. She worked under you for 4 years. She's prepared to testify today that you regularly altered scheduling logs, backdating warrants, rushing hearings without notice, and flagging defendants who contested citations." Brentley froze. Jason turned to the side door. It opened. A woman stepped in, nervous, pale, clutching her handbag like a shield, but she nodded. Once, firm, the bailiff motioned her forward. She sat, hands trembling, and under oath, she told the truth. Not just about Brentley's shortcuts, about his quotas, about the quiet emails from the city asking for higher fine totals to balance the budget, about how Brentley delivered, by targeting those least able to fight back. Jason handed up the audit trail, phone logs, email chains, redacted but damning. And then the clincher, a side-by-side of Brentley's public court schedule and the clerk's internal timestamp logs. Dozens didn't match. Brentley tried to interrupt. Jason didn't let him. "You once told me I wasn't above the law, Judge. You were right. No one is." Silence. Then, from the gallery, a single clap. Then 2. Then the entire room was on its feet. Not shouting, just standing. Brentley slammed his gavel, shouting for order, but no one sat down. Jason didn't smile. He wasn't here for glory, just the truth. The hearing was adjourned, immediately. Court officers escorted the former clerk out a side door. Brentley retreated without another word, robe flapping like a curtain pulled too fast. Outside, the press waited. Jason ignored them. He walked behind the building, around the side alley, and bent over, hands on knees, breathing shallow. Then he vomited. The adrenaline, the weight, the cost. It all came crashing through him in that quiet moment where no one could see. When he stood up, wiping his mouth with his sleeve, Maria was there. Her kids were with her. They didn't say anything. Just walked up and hugged him, one on each side. Jason knelt, pulled a small envelope from his pocket, and gave it to her. Custody motion's been reopened. You'll get your day." Maria nodded, tears in her eyes. Jason finally smiled. Just a little. Just enough. The system had tried to silence him, but the truth. It spoke louder than any gavel. What would you do if someone in power tried to shut you up for standing up? Drop your story, or even just one word, in the comments. Let's remind each other what courage looks like. The truth had landed. But justice hadn't finished its walk. Judge Brentley hadn't returned to the bench since that day. The emergency hearing ended in chaos, and the Judicial Fitness Commission launched an immediate investigation. But Jason Statham knew the system moved slowly, too slowly for the people who were still suffering under its weight. So he filed one more motion, not for himself, for Maria. It was the most personal case he'd ever touched, a custody battle buried, under technicalities and paperwork failures, all signed off by Brentley himself. Jason knew it would take more than evidence. It would take presence, clarity, humanity. The court date came fast. A replacement judge from the next county over had been appointed. Judge Elaine Masters. Fair, sharp. Someone Jason had read about once in a magazine left behind in a waiting room. She'd once written, "The law doesn't protect the loudest voice. It protects the quietest one." That gave him hope. He showed up early, dressed the same as always. No suit, no tie, but clean, steady. Every paper sorted and clipped, every statute dog-eared with yellow tabs. Maria sat beside him at the plaintiff's table. Her hands shook. Jason placed his palm gently over hers just for a second and said 4 words, "You're getting them back." The hearing began. The room was smaller than the others, no cameras, no crowd, just the essentials, Jason, Maria, the opposing counsel, and the judge who held the weight of 2 years of damage in her hands. Jason stood. He didn't talk fast. He didn't quote 10 statutes in a breath. He told a story. This is not about missed court dates. It's not about traffic fines. This is about a mother who lost her children not because she was unfit, but because the system failed her. He laid out the timeline, the faulty summons, the illegal bench warrant, the 48-hour hold with no arraignment. Each step backed with records. Some Jason had to fight to access, others he'd found sitting in open files no one ever bothered to read. Then he held up the last page, a letter, written by Maria's daughter, 8 years old, crayon on notebook paper. "Dear Judge, I know my mom is good. She lets me sleep with my favorite blanket. She didn't forget me. Please don't forget her." Jason's voice didn't crack, but everyone else's silence did. The judge leaned back, took a breath that seemed to hold the weight of the whole state. Then she looked at Maria. "You deserve your children," she said. "And I'm sorry it took this long for the law to see it." The ruling came down. Custody restored. Immediate placement. Maria collapsed into tears. Jason just closed his folder, nodded once, and whispered, "Told you." Outside, a small group of reporters waited, hoping for a quote. Jason walked past them. No statement, no speech. But when one reporter asked, "Mr. Statham, what are you planning to do next?" He paused. He didn't answer right away. He looked up at the courthouse, the same building where months ago they'd laughed at him, mocked him, fined him, tried to bury him under paper. Then he said it, quiet but firm, "I'm not done yet." Later that afternoon, Jason visited his garage. The folding table was still there. So were the stacks of papers, the little sign, and a new addition, a chalkboard, filled with names, people he'd helped, names he hadn't forgotten, names no one else had bothered to remember. But one thing was missing. He reached into his drawer and pulled out the envelope from the Oregon State Bar, the one offering special reinstatement based on exceptional circumstances of public service. He'd held on to it, unopened, for weeks. Now he opened it. Inside was a license renewal form and a handwritten note. "Sometimes the law needs someone who never forgot what it's for." Jason filled it out. signed his name, and placed it in an envelope. Then he walked out to the mailbox. No parade, no clapping crowd, just the sound of the flag lifting as he dropped the letter inside. Later that evening, Maria's kids ran up the sidewalk to hug him. One of them handed him a drawing, a picture of Jason with a cape standing next to a gavel the size of a mountain. He smiled. Not because he saw himself that way, but because maybe now they'd never have to. That night, under the orange glow of a single garage light, Jason Statham sat alone, surrounded by books, open files, and the scent of oil and paper. He wasn't just a mechanic. He wasn't just a man who knew the law. He was what justice looked like when it finally remembered how to stand up. Justice had been served, but Jason Statham didn't celebrate. He didn't need to. Brentley resigned 2 weeks after the custody, ruling. No press conference, no farewell, just a typed statement full of neutral language, in the interest of preserving public trust. There were whispers of disbarment, but no charges were ever filed. That's how systems protect their own. Jason knew better than to expect more, but something had shifted, not just in the courthouse, in the town. It started with small things. A parking officer who stopped writing tickets for cracked windshields. A new face behind the zoning desk. Oh. Woman Jason had once helped file a petition. Then came the big change. The appointment of Judge Naomi Wells, a former public defender who once slept in her office just to help her clients get a fair hearing. Jason attended the swearing-in. Stood in the back, hands in pockets. Quiet as always. When Judge Wells spotted him and nodded, Jason nodded back, but didn't move forward. He wasn't there for a spotlight, he just needed to see it for himself. That the courthouse could hold. Integrity again. Back at the garage, things slowly returned to normal. The "Need help, sit down" sign stayed exactly where it was. Only now, it wasn't lonely. Flyers were taped beside it. Resources for tenant rights, small claims clinics, GED programs. The bulletin board grew too, overflowing with thank you. Notes, success stories, and snapshots of court victories Jason had quietly helped make possible. On Saturdays, he opened early, not for oil changes, but for what the community now called Justice Mornings. He'd sit on an overturned crate with a cup of black coffee, and folks would line up with manila folders, traffic tickets, or just questions. He didn't pretend to be a lawyer. He didn't have to. They trusted him because he told the truth, even when it wasn't what they wanted to hear, and because he listened. One afternoon, a teenager named Jordan asked if Jason would help him write a speech for student council. Jason tilted his head. "What do I know about speeches?" Jordan grinned. "You got half the town to stand up in court," so Jason helped him. And when Jordan won, he came back and handed Jason the speech, neatly printed and signed on the bottom. Inspired by Statham. He pinned it to the bulletin board beside a sketch of a gavel and a transmission. The garage became something more than a business. It became a place where broken things, cars, systems, people, got a second shot. Then quietly, Jason mailed back the bar reinstatement form. He didn't plan to hang a shingle or open an office. But if the town needed him to speak with more authority, he'd be ready. On paper or off. One evening, Maria stopped by with her kids. They brought fresh bread and a card signed in thick, crooked handwriting. "Thank you for giving our mom back." Jason read it in silence, then handed it back. "You keep that," he said. "You earned it." As they drove off, Jason leaned against the garage door, watching the sun slip behind the cliffs. The waves hit the rocks like a slow heartbeat, steady and alive. He wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. He wasn't hiding behind engines. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, holding the line between silence and justice, one voice at a time. And, for the first time in a long time, the world didn't feel broken. It felt fair. Some men walk away from power. Others walk toward it. Jason Statham walked through it. Not for applause, not for revenge, but because someone had to remind the system what it was supposed to feel like. Clear, grounded, fair. He didn't wear a badge or hold a title. He wore boots with oil stains and kept the law in his head like a second language. While others used it to climb ladders, Jason used it like a wrench, to fix what was cracked, not to show off what was working. And in a world where too many people stay quiet when they see something broken, he spoke up. Every town has someone like Jason, or needs someone like him. Not just smart, but willing. Not just brave, but steady. The kind of person who doesn't wait for the right time. He makes it, because justice doesn't always come in grand gestures or perfect endings. Sometimes it shows up in quiet ways, in a motion filed by hand, in a letter signed in crayon, in a folding table tucked behind an auto shop with a sign that simply says, "Need help? Sit down." Jason never wanted to be the hero. Heroes burn out, get remembered on murals but forgotten in practice. He just wanted to be useful, consistent, a pair of hands ready to lift the heavy stuff when no one else could. And in that way, he built something more lasting than a court win or a headline. He built trust. That's what real justice is, isn't it? Not power, not punishment, but trust. The trust that someone will stand up when others sit down, that someone will speak when others stay silent, that someone will listen when no one else does. Jason didn't win every case. He didn't fix every law. But he started something that couldn't be unstarted. He showed a town how to challenge power without hating it, how to demand fairness without shouting, how to rise without pushing others down. He proved that you don't need a degree to know the law. You just need to care enough to learn it, and brave enough to use it. And somewhere, tonight, in a quiet garage lit by a single bulb, a man with tired hands and a clear heart is still reading case files. Not because he has to, but because he promised himself once. If the law was ever used to hurt the quiet ones, he'd become the loudest thing in the room. Jason Statham didn't save the world. He just saved his corner of it, and sometimes that's all the world ever needed.